Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us again. This is Aaron Wissner of Local Future, and I'm here live on the line with Nicole Foss in New Zealand, Shani Graham and Tim Darby in Australia. They are kind of southwest of Perth, and Nicole suggested that we have Shani and Tim on the line because they have been actively involved in community building in their neighborhood and their surrounding area. Shani has a wonderful talk on YouTube, a TEDx talk, TEDx Perth, I believe, from 2013, where she kind of talks about her background as initially an educator, an administrator, and then being in Australia and becoming part of the street community and then more of a broader community, kind of in the permaculture line of things. And very similar to the way Nicole and I came to peak oil, Shani and Tim also came in around the same time, around the 2003 to 2005 timeline. Films like What a Way to Go, Life at the End of Empire, and The End of Suburbia were some of those gateway films for us. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Nicole, and Nicole can share a little bit about how she knows Shani and Tim.
So Shani and Tim are the reason that I live in this part of the world, because I had been traveling around doing lectures for, well, quite a while. And then Tim contacted me and said, what would it take to get you to Fremantle? And I thought, oh, well, I am so for this, but I thought it would be a shame to just come all that way to do only the one thing. So between Tim and Shani and I and various other people in Australia who wanted lectures on this sort of thing, limits to growth in general, we put together a great big tour. And so several weeks, I think it was about a month to 6 weeks, I can't remember exactly, but so that was 2012. And then I ended up in New Zealand because the people in New Zealand hadn't had enough money to be able to get me to come from Canada to lecture, but they did have enough to get me to come from Australia. So then after my Australian tour, I ended up in New Zealand and I did another 5 weeks here. And so I was doing 2 to 3 lectures a day for weeks. This was exhausting, but it was brilliant. And I completely fell in love with this part of the world. So came back the next year, and then the year after that came back and stayed. So I have a lot to thank them for. My life would look very, very different today if it weren't for Shani and Tim. So they've been doing absolutely brilliant things. And I was so excited to see what's possible for just 2 people with a good head of enthusiasm and people skills, and a sense of the aesthetic, so to make things fun. What is actually possible to achieve? And when I went and really saw what Tim and Shani managed to do, it just blew me away. I've never seen anything like this accomplished just by 2 ordinary people off their own bat with no sponsorship, just because they felt like it, and they made it work. And I just think it's absolutely spectacular. So they ended up with a festival and things, so bringing the neighbors together to the point where they could stage a 5,000 person festival in their suburban street in Fremantle and really bring the neighbors along with them. So it was the idea of, say, there's limits to growth, but how do you bring people together to get them, motivate them to do something about that? Well, you draw them together as a community, you build that community in all sorts of different ways, and then you can talk to people about the things that make life more sustainable. So Tim and Shani teach Living Smart courses, as well as having created properties that are just incredible, just really, really sustainable. So perhaps they could tell us about first the painted fish and then where they live now.
Can I just say, this is going to sound like one of those, mutual pat on the back things, but really our life would look entirely different if we hadn't met Nicole as well. I think she pulled together, I guess, the obvious link between peak oil, climate change and finance, which prior to that I hadn't seen at all. And she was able to make sense of that in a way that gave a really obvious and clear way forward. And we've pretty much been following that ever since.
Just to add to that, I think one of the things that Nicole did kind of at the end of her talks was slowly move people, and certainly Tim, from a state of sort of despair into a state of action. And so we just had to follow her roadmap. We ticked off all the things that she said to do. And so we were living in a little house on a street about 3 blocks from the beach. And we decided to retrofit that house as much as we could for sustainability. And then we started thinking, well, how can we have a sort of household income that's a bit more secure? So we started running that as accommodation. We found we're able to buy another house in the same street. And so we had a setup where we had a house to live in, a community garden. Well, it was a garden mostly gardened by us, but it was very illegal on a road verge down to the beach. We had some goats that were in our next door neighbor's rental, I have to add, next door. We had some chickens, fish, rabbits, all on this tiny 200 square meter block. And we basically started doing what we could, but not just considering where we lived, but considering the immediate community around us and what resources, both land-wise and people-wise, were there.
You took down the fence between your neighbor's house and yours so that you could have the goats on a ladder.
We did. Well, the chickens didn't quite have enough space. So David Holgram in his book Retro Suburbia talks about working with the neighbours, and actually he tells a lovely story called Aussie Street where people do take down the fences and kind of work that land all together. And we wanted to get goats, and we had no room for the goats. So we actually just sent a note out in the street saying, would anyone like to have goats in their backyard? And we had 5 people who said, yep, we can house them. But the logical one was right next door. So we did. We took down the fence between those two and had the chickens and the goats sort of roaming between those 2 households. Yeah.
One of my favorite stories is when you told me that the council said, don't tell us what you're doing, because if you tell us, we'd have to stop you. Just do it.
Well,
that's brilliant.
It's really funny. Our guerrilla garden, we called it, was actually on the council website as a community garden, even though it was not on our land, it was actually on their land. So we have a wonderful council here who they can't actively encourage people to do things that are on the margins, but they do ignore stuff until someone complains. And they have to obviously deal with it if someone complains, but they're very good. And a lot of the things that we did, like growing food on the verge and having goats, are now actually possible because we did it illegally first. And that means you prove that it can happen and that no one died and that it was all okay. And then they're actually able to then write that into policy. So we're sort of providing a service for them.
One of the things I think absolutely brilliant is the way you brought all your neighbors along. By connecting with them to the extent that you did, you guaranteed that no one was going to complain. So that was a huge part of being able to prove the concept. If you hadn't had the people skills to go with it, it would have been harder to achieve that. So I think this is a huge advertisement for the importance of people skills when it comes to trying to achieve anything, especially in a world that's so polarized at the moment, where there's all this distrust that's building and people are always questioning other people's motives. If you've established that basis of trust, you can move mountains. And this is one of the best demonstrations of that I've seen anywhere in the world.
I'll have to quote Nicole here. 2 things. First is things can grow as far as trust can stretch. And the other one was develop relationships of trust during a time of plenty, because it's really difficult to do during a time of shortage. Probably my favourite example about that from Holbert Street was we did actually have a complaint at one stage. There was a fella who said, we didn't have a car at that stage, but what we decided to do was build a shed in the shape of a car and put it on the verge because we didn't have anywhere to park. And so that was everyone parked on the road, and we used that shed to put all our bikes in, including a community cargo bike that everyone could use.
It was
and we put wheels on.
Transit, wasn't it? Even with the license plate.
Yeah, yeah.
I remember
So
it well.
we sort of went, look, we don't have a car, but this is the space that we would be using, and we're parking our bikes here. But the guy across the road sent us a gnarly email saying, you know, he was upset because it was in the way of where he backed his car out. And he sent us a gnarly email saying, everyone hates what you're doing. And it was interesting. We went, no, they don't. And then we thought, well, maybe they do. Maybe people are just being polite. So we actually sent out a note to everyone in the street saying, we'd like to gather and just hear what is your response to what we're doing, because we kind of think that everyone likes it, but maybe they don't. And if someone's complained and says everyone hates it, maybe we need to have a meeting and give everyone the opportunity to say so. And it's interesting because we essentially had no right to call a meeting in the street, but we did. And everyone, because there was that sense of belonging and community, people went, yeah, great, I'll come along. And it was really fantastic that, I guess, first of all, that everyone came, including the guy who'd complained. I thought that was really brave of him. And we just gave everyone the opportunity to have a voice. And I think that's really important, that you negotiate with and listen to, and if there is a problem, actually go, yeah, okay, let's all get together. And rather than making it us against him, we opened it up for the whole street to kind of have a say. And that way, rather than us trying to shut him down, we went, well, what does everyone think? And it was a really powerful thing to, given that we had no right to hold that meeting, you know, I mean, we're just a couple of people in the street, no one had to come, but everyone did. And it was really powerful for that guy to hear that his opinion wasn't really commonly held, not from us, but from the other people in the street.
He actually left halfway through the meeting. But it was good, and it was lovely for people to be able to articulate what it meant to them, what our street was. And it wasn't just about what we were doing. There were a lot of other people doing things as well. It's not just about us. But I felt a bit sad that he had a lot of pressure on him, so I'm glad in a way that he left. But there were people who didn't agree with what we were doing. One guy during the fiesta used to go away for the weekend. And he said to me one day, I know everyone appreciates this. I can't appreciate it. So I'm actually just going to get out of your way and let you get on with it. And I think that's a valid alternative for objection necessarily. They're not sitting there being miserable, but he kind of recognized that he was in the minority. So, but we did. I was a public school principal, so that might mean something different in America. That's like the government schools. And in a government school, you accept everyone. Every kid that comes is valued and important, and if they're not fitting in, then you do your damnedest to make sure that they are and that their needs are being met. And I think I just took that attitude towards the street. So we were quite strategic about, this house has someone in it who hasn't participated. How can we connect with them? Can I connect them with someone else in the street? How is it that I can kind of get them involved? And that's how you end up with a fiesta where everyone is doing something, because I would invent jobs for people who didn't sort of have something to do. And it's interesting where we're living now. I tend to be a bit the same. I walk past houses and go, do I know who lives there? Why don't I know who they are? And how is it that I might be able to meet them?
It's interesting that Shani comes from very mainstream bureaucratic background as a principal. She's been all her working life, I guess, belonging to a kind of bureaucratic institution, whereas I've always lived in the cracks and margins. And I think coming together, I've pointed out to her that often you just have to ignore the legislation and break a lot of rules. On the other hand, she's pointed out to me that the bureaucracy is not your enemy. If you can work with it, that's great. And so I think we've learned quite a lot from each other in that way. Yeah.
I think for me, it's bang for you. Yeah, I think for me, it's bang for your buck. Where can you actually get the most easily, the most kind of change? And so if you're looking at a bureaucratic system, it's unlikely to change, because even if you took all the people away and put a whole pile of different people in, it's a system, it's not the individual people. And so I find a great deal of encouragement and enthusiasm and love of working with what I'm starting to call geographic community. So it's not a community of people who meet together to talk about peak oil, or people who get together in their community garden, or people who work around a kind of multicultural centre where they're really coming together and they feel like they're real community and very inclusive, but they're actually around an interest. And so I'm interested in using the random people who happen to live around you, which are often more diverse than we think. You know, you'd think in a certain postcode, everyone would be the same, but they're often a lot more diverse. And I like kind of drawing a line and going, this is where we're going to put our energy in and our enthusiasm, and people respond really well to that.
Does that come out of that discussion with Zelia and her mum?
Yeah, we have a neighbour who moved her mother into the end of the street where she was. And she talks about the fact that as you age, your community becomes where you can walk. And so it's not about necessarily even about your family who are a long way away or living in different places, but it's the people that you see when you walk from your house down to the local street. And so that is kind of a concept, not only for people who are aging, but I think for everyone.
And also particularly if we think about oil shortage and trying to reduce your impact, the more local you can become, then the more powerful that community becomes and the more real it becomes. And also in a circumstance like COVID, which certainly not the precipitating factor we're expecting, but you know, it's a lot about maintaining limited travel. And so it kind of works in really well with the whole relocalization thing.
I think that the strongest part of the way you've approached this is the whole idea of bring people together first, that's what comes together first, not necessarily the shared interest, but the shared interest in terms of we all live in this particular place. And I think that's absolutely critical, because that is how you build the foundation. And it's only when you've built the foundation that you can build something on that. So if you start to go for the high level interest first without having any connection with people, then if this is something that's totally outside their experience, they're not going to relate to it if they don't know anything about you and they don't know where you're coming from and why you would say things like this. Whereas if they have a connection and they already trust you and you start to talk about things like this, people will be so much more open to it. And I think especially in today's divided times, there's literally nothing more important that people could possibly be doing than reaching out in their neighborhood without asking about anyone's politics or anything like that, or their position on particular issues, to just say, hey neighbor, we all live here, how can we help each other out, make things better? Or here, I have goats, you have kids, would you like to pet my goats? Or something like that. Or I've seen pictures of you guys taking baby goats down to a coffee shop on leashes and sitting in a coffee shop each with baby goats on your lap. And this is the sort of thing that just attracts attention in the best possible way and draws people in. It creates curiosity, and then you have a chance to tell people what you're doing and why. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people are missing. They do it the other way around. They start with the interest and they ignore the community. It's like the community sort of comes second. And you've put community first, and that's exactly the right way to do it. Tell them about the festival, and that incredible festival. This Hulbert Street is not a long street, and you got, was it 7,000 people? in that street. So it was just phenomenal what you managed to achieve, and the
Well,
enthusiasm.
Well, look, it grew very slowly out of the street Living Smart course that we ran. So Living Smart runs for 7 weeks. You set a goal every week. And at the end of it, I said, okay, well, this is a street course. What do we want our street to be like? And one of the things that people said was, let's have a joint garage sale. So let's all get together with our stuff, which we must organise for here. Let's get together with our stuff and we'll just have some fun together and sell it all. So that's where it started. And one lady said, you know what, I might make some cookies and sell them. And the kids went, well, we should make lemonade. And so they made lemonade. And so the next year we opened one of our houses and those same people made cookies and lemonade, but 800 people came to see the house. So, and that was overwhelming for us. So the next year we thought,
what about
well,
the house was it that they were interested in? I mean,
was
what's
the
special
painted
about your
fish.
house? The art.
So the painted fish had, the painted fish had 3 different houses on the 500 square meter block. There was an old heritage cottage, 1888, which is very old for Australia. A studio that Tim had built, beautiful glass and steel studio down the back, and a little railway carriage. And this is probably important. We didn't start with all this community building stuff. We started with infrastructure. So Tim had put in solar panels, which were very rare at that point, rainwater tanks. He retrofitted everything in really clever ways for solar passive design.
And made it all beautiful.
And it was beautiful at the same time.
A really interesting point, Nicole, that sometimes people come to do tours that are ostensibly about passive solar design or water collection, but what they get is, oh, this is a lovely space to live in. And so I do think that that's really important.
And sometimes people come from the opposite. They want to go and see the beautiful pond that we had there, and you know, it was well known, had a really big beautiful tree in the backyard, but then there was also a veggie patch there, and there was, you know, obviously a lot of money spent on water and solar. So what else is going on, you know? And so then that grew. The next year we opened the house we were living in, which got finished, and then someone said, well, I'll open my garden. So we ended up with 5 open gardens, 2 open homes, and we had a lot of artists in the street. So we had 5 open art studios as well. So about a third of the houses actually had their houses open for people to kind of come in. Now that's really attractive. I mean, everyone likes going to a home open as it is, but to have all of that going on, and then we had some food, and it was too big. 7,500 people was probably too big. But, you know, it was very low budget. I remember the first 3 years we didn't get permission to shut the street. And the 4th year, a lady down at the council found out about this, and she rose merry hell, and you know, you need to have a traffic plan, and it's going to cost you $2,500, and don't tell me you can't afford it. The council gave you $4,000, and went on and on and on. And finally I got, in desperation, I spoke to the sustainability officer and said, we are not paying that money. You find a way around this. This is a dead end street. All we needed to do was put a barrier at the end to stop the cars. And he found out that it was actually $75 to shut the street and $75 to open the street at the end of the day. So it cost us $150 for a guy to turn up with the cones. And so it's a really good example how you could get put off if you weren't sort of determined by things like that to do fun and interesting things. The problem with the story of Holbert Street is people see it as too big. I could never do that. That's the answer. And Nicole, you were talking about how important it is to be having what I call fun to start with. So people come and say, I'm distressed about peak oil. I have to work with my neighbours. We need to take the fence down. Oh my God, we need to do it all right now. And they're all in a bit of a panic. And I'll say, how about have a picnic? Like, just start with something fun and keep your mouth shut about all that. We never mentioned to our immediate neighbours anything about sustainability necessarily. They come and they look and they take that on. And interestingly, when COVID happened, one of them said to me, I finally get what you guys are doing.
We had some...
So, you know, it had actually had an impact, and they had seen what the point of having all that food in our pantry, like what was all that about? And having goats in the backyard and growing all this food. You know, we grow 60% of our vegetables in winter and about 80% in summer. And people are frantically buying seeds and seedlings and trying to get food produced in the ground in the next 3 weeks, which was never going to happen. So they started to want to learn about growing food. And they look around and go, well, who knows how to do that? Oh, well, Tim and Shani are doing it.
There was a really nice thing that happened. We had 2 lawyers living next door, and their little boy used to come and eat the strawberries from the front of our garden, which Shani deliberately planted there so that people would come and eat the strawberries. And eventually she said, I tell you what, how about I give you some strawberry plants? And from the strawberry plants, it went to broad beans, you know. And I think there's definitely something to be said for coming at things sideways. A little bit like, you know, they reckon that when you're, not that I've ever done this, I'd have to say, but if you're ever trying to train a bird of prey, you never look at it in the face, you know, and I think it's kind of like that. I think that some of the stuff is so scary that to come at it really directly is confronting and often can create a denial, whereas when you come in sideways, it often creates an interest and almost let them come to you rather than be kind of in your face, you know, you've got to take this action.
Nicole, we'd love for you to come back and see where we are now.
I would love to. So for people won't realize what you've done since Hulbert Street. So they bought this big place and without asking for planning permission, just cut it up into 4 separate properties. Completely.
6 now. 6 now.
Oh my God. It was 4 the last time I was there. But just completely redid the entire property. It's now the most incredible permaculture garden right in the middle of suburbia. It's a whole community all by itself. And you've planted goat fodder and things around, haven't you, as well? So that when you can take your goats for walks around the whole neighborhood. I think it's absolutely incredible. And didn't you invite the mayor around to see all the things that you did that you hadn't got planning permission for? Sorry.
It's really interesting here because we have a more varied and layers of community. So we actually have a community where we live. So there are 4 places that are rented in the long term. And so those people really have the opportunity to become part of what we're doing here in a really interactive way. We have a little common room. So people live in very small houses, but there is that space available for them to have family or stay or whatever. We have a short-term accommodation for woofers. I don't know if they have that term in the States, but they're basically people who come short-term and stay with you, often backpackers, stay with you in exchange for labour, for volunteering at
stands for willing workers on organic farms.
Well done, even though we're not, well, we are organic. And then we have our house that we live in. And so that is a really, it's not an intentional community, it's a benevolent dictatorship. People rent from us. And I think that's what makes it attractive for lots of baby boomers, for example, who don't want to leave their house and their community and where it is that they're established, but also don't want to be living in a 4-bedroom house rattling around and need support. So as we age, we will be able to put a nurse into one of the rooms who can come and shower me in the morning or whatever it is that needs to be done so that I can avoid having to go into a home and I can die in place here, which is a bit morbid, but both our parents are at that stage. So we're thinking about it.
One of the things, Perth in Western Australia, because it's such a sprawling country, we have some of the worst urban planning in the world. That is to say, everyone wants a big house. Australia's a big country, which means that we've got these massive sprawling suburbs. And what the
bigger houses in the US.
And yeah, actually bigger than the US. And So, and it's that thing where infrastructure follows behaviour follows infrastructure. Because everyone has sprawling suburbs and houses, we all drive around in cars, and because we all have cars, people are happy to live like an hour out of town in a bit of reclaimed swamp, you know. So what they've started doing is urban infill, but usually the urban infill means having a big house with a little bit of a garden. You knock it over and you put 3 big houses and no garden. So what we call this is an experimental urban infill, where we've kept the footprint of the building the same, but reconfigured the house to be 6 houses instead of 1. And the land that would otherwise have been bowled over and put under concrete is now used for goats and gardens and water collection. And at the same time, that's addressed a lot of issues around isolation, loneliness. And it's kind of, one of the reasons we did that is because we were really unhappy with most of the models that we saw of how urban infill happens. So we've kind of done it not all that legally, but again, it's been done well. And ironically enough, we spoke to someone in council a little while ago, and he said, geez, you know, some of the legislation's starting to catch up with what you've done. If you leave it long enough, it's going to become legal. So,
you're just, you know,
sometimes I'm frustrated by the fact that we have to be a little bit careful about telling who what we've done. But there was a guy we met called Cormac Russell, who's big on asset-based community development. And he said, oh no, look, the edge is where it's at, you know, like be proud of the fact that you're not mainstream, because that's a very important position to hold. And I really like that idea, that like it's kind of a really important position to be on the boundary, stretching things, but doing it pretty well so that people go, oh, actually, I didn't think that could work, but it does. And sometimes, you know, it's better to just do it and then get retrospective approval after it's been proven.
It's easier to get forgiveness than permission.
It's kind of like the edge effect in permaculture as well, that you're looking for things that you wouldn't normally get by going right to the edge of the law in this case.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
Now, Nicole, the beg for forgiveness quote, yeah, I'd love to know who originally said that, but
I have no idea. I've heard it from you, but I've heard it for years from other people too. So
yeah.
I have no idea where it came from. It's not original to me.
Now, I have not stopped saying it, but I say the important permission is the people around you who will be affected. Yes. Because sometimes, even in the permaculture movement, you get this kind of radical thing where it's like, no, fuck you, fuck you, neighbor. I'm not going to change. I'm going to get my chickens. I can do what I want. And that's actually not the point. Yeah. The other thing with beg for forgiveness is you have to think what the consequences might be, and you have to be willing to wear those consequences.
Yes, absolutely.
Quite strategic around your thinking. So, you know, we've done a few things here, then we've gone, okay, what is the worst thing that would happen? Okay, let's make sure that we're able to deal with that. So yeah, beg for forgiveness, but get permission from those affected is now what I'm starting to say. Yeah.
Shani, it feels like you're bringing, it feels like you're bringing some experience from your school experience, because, you know, there's always those students who will test the edge to see where the boundaries are. But then as an administrator, you just have to be very clear on, you know, you broke the rule. This is the consequence for breaking that particular rule. And there are kids who, they will break rules because they know the consequence is something they can handle.
So we had a value statement, I don't know if it's still there, in our schools when I was a principal, that said, obey just laws. Now, interesting that it would be in there in the first place, but what I used to say as a principal is, if you can mount me an argument why that is not a just rule, then I will let you get away with breaking it. And of course they never did, because I demanded it be in writing to the school council, and they had to address, you know, and usually they saw the rules as just, but I found that a really interesting and quite amazing and quite alternative, I suppose, approach to that whole rule breaking. I had a wonderful boy who did object to wearing the school uniform. And so I said that to him, and lo and behold, he actually went home and wrote an essay, did a whole pile of research into the effect of wearing uniforms, whole pile of research into all that went. The first thing I said is, well, you need to go and see the policy from where that comes from. So he went to the school office and said, I'd like the dress code policy. And because they chucked up, they had no idea where it was, what it was. So they had to come back to me, and I gave him the dress code policy. Oh, no, I wasn't principal. That's right. I'm coaching him from home. He's our next door neighbor. So I said, first thing, go and get the policy. So he went and got the policy. He wrote this big essay explaining why you weren't allowed to be negatively impacted because of from an educational experience. So you weren't allowed to be punished for not wearing a uniform as far as education went. So he said, I'm a school counsellor. I have to stand up in front of the school, and that's important to me because I'm a shy person and it's a learning experience for me, and you're stopping me from doing that because I'm not wearing the school uniform. Anyway, went off to the school council. He was refused to address the school council, which would never have happened when I was there. I would have been encouraging all this, of course.
Shani for president. Shani for president.
And the school council in the end said no to him. And I said to him, you're going to have to wear it if you don't win this. You're going to have to wear the school uniform. You understand that, don't you? So he lost, but he wore the school uniform inside out, which they basically let him get away with. He was a cheeky little bugger, so he used to wear it inside out. But and interestingly, none of the other kids followed him in that situation. But he had seen a rule, decided it was unjust, and got on with what he believed. And that's, I suppose, we do that, but we don't get into fighting the policymakers around it. So I talk about a circle of concern, all the things that you're kind of worried about, a circle of influence that's smaller than that, which defines where your skills and your abilities and your energy is possible to use, and then a circle of action beneath that. And so that stops people, if they really consciously think about that, it stops them from burning out. So we don't do protests. We don't do petitions, we don't do letters to council, we don't go in and meet with people. We quietly do what we can at home and share that in whatever way we can with kind of other people working on that marginal, very home-based idea.
Some really interesting discussions around the XR process, which is...
hang on. XR stands for Extinction Rebellion.
Ah, okay.
So very, very popular in the UK especially. They're the ones gluing themselves to stuff and doing...
I've heard of Extinction Rebellion. I just hadn't heard of that name for them.
Yeah, so very creative for your viewers who might not know about it. Very creative, non-violent, direct action.
With the intention of creating maximum disruption in order to bring about essentially policy change. But it's just really interesting that we did feel at one stage a lot of probably peer group pressure to become involved in that. And where we don't necessarily disagree with it, it's kind of not where our energy goes. We are more interested in, I guess, creating a resilient community in preparation for the, as we see it, inevitable demise of a lot of that infrastructure anyway. Yeah, so it's just, as Shani said, you've only got so many hours in the day. What did I say? 2 hands and 24 hours. It's up to you really to choose where you're going to put your energy. And this is the way we've chosen to go about it.
And XR is a really good example of something that was well within our influence. You know, they need speakers, which I really love doing. They need creative kind of ideas, which Tim could do. They need people who can build machines and lock on devices or whatever else it is that they're needing. But we had to consciously pull back and go, the garden will suffer if we do that. And the community here will suffer if we do that. So I just think it doesn't matter what you do, but I think it's important that you do something and that you keep an eye on your own mental health as you do that process.
Through that.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think there are a lot of people who are prepared to march. There are far fewer people who can do what you can do. And I think that sort of setting an example is the most important thing you could be doing. Other people can do the marching. You've got your garden to demonstrate to people how to live sort of post everything that's going on in 2020.
And
Apocalypse bingo year.
and I kind of like to say, though, that none of those things are more important than the other. So I don't think one's harder necessarily. I think they're just different. And so it's really important that you don't look at someone's other action and it's easy to do, and I still do it all the time. But it's really important to realize that we all actually have the same circle of concern, and we're all actually working in the same space about the same stuff. And we should be supportive and encouraging of each other. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I'm thinking that there are so few people who have the capacity to do what you're doing because they don't have the established infrastructure and everything already. They don't have this built already. So your role in being able to present this fully fledged example to the community is something that other people are not in a position to do. So for you to be able to take that on as a role, I think is the most important thing you could be doing. Other people who don't have the ability to do that can do something else.
Yeah.
It's a good thing we got that early warning, eh, Nicole?
It's a good thing we did.
It takes time to prepare. It really does. And
it does.
And
that was, again,
something's going to happen and it doesn't happen by next Thursday. Everyone thinks, oh, well, that was obviously wrong. But the point is that we're moving. It's like a slow motion train wreck, if you like. We're moving in a direction of limits to growth starting to bite, and COVID has accelerated the process. And people who've had 10 years to build up to this are in a much better position than people who are only hearing about it now. It was important to talk about it back then, but at the same time, people who were talking about it left themselves open to everyone saying, oh, well, you were obviously wrong. And that is frustrating in its own way because everyone went back to sleep again. And now it's a question of trying to wake people up again, but is it possible to wake them up quickly enough this time? And it's really challenging, especially with COVID, because so many people seem to have latched onto this sense that COVID is some kind of tyranny and that every country that's trying to protect people through public health measures is somehow fascist, when actually some of them are. But the United States is heading in that direction. I wouldn't say the same of Australia or New Zealand, but both countries have been accused of that. And I don't know to what extent you've noticed it, but in New Zealand, they actually have a political party for QAnon now. And I have noted that literally they do. And I have noticed in Australia, this is really taking off too. There were people in Sydney, for instance, who had organized talks for me, who started coming up with all this QAnon stuff and how Trump was saving the babies from the Hollywood cannibals and all this ridiculous stuff. And I was amazed at the extent to which this was taking off in that part of the world. So this is the downside of community building. When people come together around something like that, that's completely fake and absolutely twisted, so that it's taking everything that you'd want people to do and turning it round. And that is so disturbing. But
what disturbs
this time?
What disturbs me about it is it seems to be the radical left and the radical right that have joined together in this.
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, we're lucky in WA. We haven't had a case now for nearly 6 months. And so life for a lot of people has become just returned to normal for a lot of people, not everyone. And so they're not as attracted to that. What is the answer to this? You know, what's happened? I've got a few friends that send me stuff, and I love the criticism of, oh, we thought you'd have an open mind, you know, but you obviously don't, you know, send you bits and pieces. But it's not as big in WA as it is over east.
Yeah, New Zealand has virtually nothing as well. I mean, there's Auckland, but nothing in the rest of the country. Life is pretty much normal, and we just have to put masks on if we use public transport. That's the only restriction in this area. But in other parts of the world,
the two of you were mentioning that you had a little bit of more interest in what you were doing since the COVID started back in March or whatever. have you noticed more than just a little of that? I mean, what are people being interested in? Are you helping people with stuff? Are they asking you? What sort of things are they asking you? Are they starting to a little bit? Were they working together on stuff for a while there? Like, what should we put in our pantries or?
Yeah, we initially, Living Smart is a very interactive program where people talk to each other. We do lots of hands-on stuff. And for years, people have been saying, can you do an online, version? And I have said, no, definitely not. It's not possible. It's, people have to get together in community. And of course, this happened and a council offered me a job doing an online version, which worked extremely well. I was amazed. So I then, after things had settled down a bit, offered a series of online workshops. So solar passive house design, water harvesting and collection, those were the most popular two, interestingly enough. Basic gardening, very popular. Preserving, we're about to run one on keeping goats. What else did we do? Composting. And they were, I wouldn't have said there was an overwhelming tsunami on those, but they were a lot more popular than they have been in the past. And we are starting to now run them at Ecoburbia on site. And we're getting, compared to what we did when we tried it sort of 3 or 4 years ago, we're getting a bit of interest now in that. I have started, just last night, we started our another online Living Smart course, and so exciting. We have people from New South Wales and Victoria, South Australia, Queensland. Those are states right on the other side of Australia. And we even have a lady from the US who's getting up at 5 a.m. to do the course with us. So that's really exciting, and inroads that I don't think would have happened without that sort of prompting of COVID.
Would you like to make those courses available to people in the US? I mean, put links in the, so we could put links in the show notes for this.
Yeah. Look, all it would take for me, I'm not so concerned about money anymore and needing to earn a living. Well,
it's just spreading the information.
One of the great things that's happened for us with COVID is I lost all my paid work, and it hasn't actually made any difference. We were getting the tiny house out the back.
Hang on, it does make a difference.
Does it?
I used to get my morning coffee at a cafe and I always bought a muffin as well, okay? And now I have to go and get a takeaway coffee and bring it home and have my muffin at home. So that's quite a major difference when you're a coffee addict.
Our income has reduced, but our expenditure has reduced in relation. So we have sort of been pushed to do something that we've been talking about for ages, which is, can we just live on the food that we grow and the rent that we get? And it looks like we probably can, which is fantastic.
And so instead of
as well, or did
we haven't done it. Do you know what's happened, Nicole? It has got so it's got so popular. All the hippies have started doing it, and so we've kind of left them at it because they probably need it more than we do. So we haven't done a lot of dumpster diving for a long time.
We do occasionally get deliveries from a friend who is, probably shouldn't say that. Yeah, she's beautiful and always really well dressed. And she arrives at our house like in a white skirt with some dumpster diving that she got that's excess to her requirement.
She only dumpster dives in the very expensive dumpsters. But yeah, to go back to Living Smart, what I said to this American lady is if she can get 5 or 6 people interested, I will run a course for them. So I'll do it at a time that suits that community, and then I'll see if I can get some others to join in, obviously, but I'm really willing to do that for sort of anyone around the place. And the course is interesting because there is no set curriculum. So I can design it around the needs of whatever community it is that we're doing.
Well, New Zealand might be interested as well.
Yeah, we've had one run in New Zealand, but yeah, anywhere. Go for your life.
Do you want to talk?
I will talk to my Living Economies educational trust people and see what we can do.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the transition from getting the Beaky Bunch going and how quick that was ready to...
Oh, okay. So we talked a little bit about the kind of infrastructure and the small community that we've got where it is that we're living. And because we have this common room, it does extend out. We have meetings for various groups of people here. We run yoga here once a week. We have, you know, that room is available for people to actually do things.
House concerts.
It's a bit like, yeah, lots of house concerts. It's a bit like a community centre, except instead of all the breakout rooms, you've got houses. So it has its own kitchen, etc. So that's another layer of community. That's more of a community of interest. And then the West Beaky Bunch, we started by having a little picnic, and my partner in crime and I knocked on everyone's, no, we didn't. We sent flyers out to 350 houses around us, and we invited them to this picnic. And we had 110 people that rocked up out of those 350 houses. So really big success. And at that, we kind of took ideas about what sort of things we could do together. And in true benevolent dictatorship style, Kerry and I sat down with that list and basically went, January, we're doing this. February, we're doing this. March, we're doing this. I've never worked with anyone so efficiently. We had the entire program for the next 6 months organized, all the flyers and the emails written. So we then said, do you think we need a committee? So we called for a committee. A couple of people came and we talked about something for 3/4 of an hour and decided, and the committee decided this as well, that it was probably far more efficient for us to just get together as a big group every now and again and brainstorm things that could do and leave Kerry and I to actually sort of organize that. And we were quite happy with that. And I tell that story because that's an okay model. It's all right to have that sort of personality and to organize community stuff in that way. That's actually okay, because people often tell bossy people that they shouldn't be doing it like that and they should do it like this. And as long as you're listening to what people want and just not doing what you want, that's actually fine. So we had been doing that for 12 months. We ended up with 60% of the people around here on an email list, because we did 3 door knocks in the end, where we actually knocked on doors and handed over the leaflets, much more effective. And we have a street coordinator in every street who's responsible for delivering the flyers and also developing community in that street. So making sure that as many people possible actually know each other in that particular street. So COVID hits. We had a meeting. We got a separate phone so that it could be passed from person to person if anyone got sick, with a special number, a special support number if you needed help at all. Within 24 hours, we had 29 volunteers from the email. I sent an email out, 29 people volunteering, and we had a flyer out to all the houses in those 350 house area. So it was an amazingly, now again, Nicole, we had set it up to have fun, but the infrastructure was there such that the whole thing just rolled really quickly, and we were able to actually provide that support. Ironically, we got 1 call on the helpline, 2 calls actually. Someone wanted some hand sanitizer. So we had a family who started making hand sanitizer. He worked in the mining industry and could get some ingredients for that. And she wanted some hand sanitizer, so that was possible. And there was a neighbor who was worried. She was going away and she was worried about the guy that lived next door to her. So we set up someone to ring him every day, just check that he was actually okay. And she continues to ring him to this day. And if she doesn't ring him, he rings her to make sure she's okay. It's a beautiful sort of relationship that they have now. So we're really proud. I'm really proud of the West Beaky Bunch. And also, interestingly enough, they are also, people are starting to see themselves as belonging there. So on Facebook, people will refer to the area that they live in if they're swapping. I'm in a lot of trading groups, and they'll say, I'm in the West Beaky Bunch. Right? Even though No one else knows what it is.
Geographic location.
And you know, and someone on the outside of the West Beaky Bunch is like not allowed in, you know, even though they live on the West. So it's been a wonderful time setting all that up. And I think COVID united us in an amazing way.
There's a very similar example that in New Zealand, Project Littleton. So I don't know if you would have heard of any of that, but set up by one of the living economies people who I've worked with. She died, unfortunately, this year. Her name was Margaret Jeffries, but she set up a time bank and a whole range of community initiatives in Littleton, which is right near Christchurch. When they had the earthquake, the Christchurch Council phoned the Littleton Time Bank and said, who do you have? What do they got? We need them right now. And everything was there. All the infrastructure was there. They knew who was there, what skills they had, what tools they had, and they could mobilize them quickly.
It's interesting. I was talking to someone from the Red Cross, and they do a lot of disaster sort of emergency planning. And she was saying to me, within the first 48 hours, 90% of the support that you get comes from the people who live around you, not from the government. So there is no cavalry. You know, you really do need to have those relationships with people around you. And in that full crisis, that immediate moment, everyone does rally. So, you know, they would help strangers, they would do whatever. But if you have an idea of who it is and where the resources are, then yeah, it's quicker and faster, definitely.
If I can go back a step, when we initially went and handed out the flyers, a couple of interesting things happened. One is when I knocked on the door, because I'm a scruffy looking hippie, they were like a bit iffy about answering and the door. It worked better with Shani, but the thing that happened is if they recognise me as the sand sculpture guy, because I do a sand sculpture on the Verge every year for Christmas, and so people kind of like look forward to what are you going to do this year, you know? So if they recognised me as the sand sculpture guy, it was okay. And they recognised Shani as the goat woman. So even before we got to the point of trying to initiate that contact, just the fact that we were in the public sphere in a way that's accessible and kind of obviously unthreatening and positive. So it even starts right back, you know?
It's interesting. People often say to me, what can I do, you know? And there's so much you can do on the border of your property that is going to encourage and get you known in the community, so you have some authority for the next stage that you might want to do. So book exchanges, grow free carts, just a herb garden out the front with come and help yourself, a sand sculpture. Obviously not everyone's able to do that, but you know, putting a
solar cooker with a pot of rabbit stew right on the front of the verge.
Yes, a solar cooker out there, or a sand pit with a few toys just left there, you know, or a bench. There's so much creative stuff you can do. And it can be on your property if you're worried about your local council, or you can't stop someone putting a sand pit right on the edge of their property that other people tend to be able to access. I mean, there's nothing to stop you doing that.
And it's interesting, actually, when we first moved here, we got busted by the council for putting up some flags. We ran a pizza night. We put some flags up and someone complained. But now that we've been here a while, people kind of go, oh yeah, they might be a bit weird, but they're safe, you know? And we're actually, because this is a much more affluent area probably than where we were living. And so they were a bit freaked out by the hippies. But, you know, we are at home here now and we're pretty well accepted, eh?
I'm not at all surprised. I should think you'd be a prized community asset, not just accepted.
I don't know about that sometimes, Nicole. But, you know, the views from here are beautiful and people pay a lot of money for their views. Although I think the people behind us are very happy because we could easily and legally build a big 2-story house out the back, which would totally destroy their views. So I think a lot of them shut up quite a lot because they know that it could be a lot worse, you know? Yeah.
Well, we have about 3 more minutes so that, you know, our viewers can enjoy this as a podcast or a YouTube video. So I'm really curious.
Tim's just disappeared to the loo, so I'll answer anything.
Oh, sure. So I think my main question is, so for people who are trying to do some community building, you know, if you were to do your elevator talk and you know, you were in the elevator with someone, they said, yeah, I've been thinking about doing some community building, but just not really sure where to start. You know, what would you share with them in like a minute or two?
I'd probably say, what was the most interesting and enjoyable community event that you've ever been at? It might be a family event, it might be, and if that's not something that comes to mind, what are you most passionate about? Are you really into tomato bottling and bottling pasta? Invite people around to your house to do that. So the worst thing they can do is look at my TED Talk and copy something, or read our website and copy what it is that we've done. That's probably the worst thing they can do. But you will discover things that is possible that will link and make sense in your community. And if you can't come up with something, then have a chat to the neighbour. Say, hey, I really want to develop community in this area. What do you think we could do? Starting with a picnic is a really quick, easy kind of idea. It's not too threatening for people. And then all you need is a bit of a whiteboard and people will come up with the ideas. You just have to trust in the creativity of the people that live around you.
I used to really enjoy the picnics that you had for movie nights, because on Halbert Street, it was a cul-de-sac. And so there was we put a screen at the end and all the neighbors would bring pillows and picnics and sit in the middle of the street watching a film, like The Power of Community. And I think things like that were just excellent ways to draw people together. It's completely voluntary.
The nice thing about the movies is you can be a bit anonymous, so you can come and sit and you don't have to necessarily talk to someone. And if you do it in a local park just by putting a power cord to the nearest house, it's slightly illegal. You know, it's kind of, wow, weird, you know, but it's kind of not really, because, you know, people have parties in the park and this is not that much different to a party. And, you know, and so there are great advantages to something like that. So look to those things for ideas, but don't be bound by having to do something that you read in a book as, you know, the way to do it. There is no one way to do it. You'll figure it out yourself.
I thought the guerrilla gardening was really good for bringing people together too, because I mean, at first people were saying, won't somebody wreck it? And no, they weeded it. So people didn't destroy it. They valued it and they looked after it, even although it didn't belong to anyone. Yeah.
So there's plenty of ideas out there.
Something that we've been doing quite a bit here.
This is the time to finish off.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
No, go ahead, Tim. What were you going to say?
We've been doing quite a lot of house concerts where we set up the free herb garden out the front. It's also doubles as an amphitheatre. And so we've done quite a lot of house concerts, which, again, sometimes people drive past and then sneak back and have a look. Sometimes, you know, if they're feeling comfortable enough, they'll come and join in, be a participant. And we had a permaculture singer, Charlie McGee, come and do a gig here. So it's kind of a bit thin edge of the wedge into the music's great, but it also has a really good message. And again, a bit like the movies, you can either come and join in, obviously, or you can sort of sneak in a bit when it's dark and no one's looking.
And you're part of a group called the Alfalfa Males, aren't you?
Yeah. I've started doing a similar kind of thing, I guess, writing funny and interesting songs that are listenable but also have a kind of another message.
The latest one on YouTube is I Like Goats.
I've written a really, well, I think it's really funny, a funny song about Susie Confusey, the gender-bending chicken, who... I'll send you a copy of the song when we finish recording it.
Sure.
Like it. But that's a bit like you were saying with art and music. It can be a really non-threatening way of introducing people to ideas. Whereas I actually had an experience at a XR rally, the only one I ever went to. where a lot of people were yelling and, you know, we want this, we want that. And then the only thing that actually worked was a friend of mine, Lucy, sang this really beautiful song. And it was all about like love and compassion. And it made me realise that if you want someone to hear you, if you get in their face and shout, they're not going to hear you. But if you sing them a beautiful song of compassion, or if you make a funny bit of art that they can relate to, you're much more likely to get a footing than being threatening and yelling. Anyway, this is kind of interesting, the importance
Absolutely.
of art and music in the kind of the thin edge of the wedge in terms of reaching people, I think is really important.
But as the non-creative, non-musical one, I'm going to say again, you will find a way. You will manage to do it in your own way, in your own community. And you look to others for examples, but you don't have to do what they did.
I love the way Shani says, as the non-creative one, she's just an artist who works in the medium of social interaction.
Yes, exactly. You are phenomenally creative, Shani. You might not be an artist, but you really are creative.
Shani and Tim, before you guys go, you mentioned a website. Is there a way people can find out more about what you are doing and where to go from here?
So www.ecoburbia.com.au. So if you Google Ecoburbia, our logo is a nice green goat, so you should be able to find it from there. The best way, if you really want to kind of find out what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, is to follow our Facebook page. So if you're really into cute goat videos, that's what's on there at the moment. But I share a lot about growing food, growing community. Basically, it's a little bit of a journal for me and a diary. I tend to try and keep track with what we're up to. But when it comes to the basics of what we've set up here, and I will go this afternoon and do an update on the West Beaky Bunch, there's a lot of information on our website as well. And we'd love to hear from people. You know, sometimes you see those email us here or whatever, and you think, oh, I won't bother them or whatever. But no, we'd love to hear from people.
And on Facebook, it's East Beaky Bunch?
You won't be able to get into the West Beaky Bunch. We're very exclusive.
But that's where the name comes from.
Yeah. So, yeah, Beaky is for Beaconsfield. But the best Facebook page is Ecoburbia. So it's ECOBURBIA. There is another one, but look for the green goat logo.
All right. Well, thank you, Tim and Shani. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you all three for being here again. And I would like to thank all the viewers for sticking with us. If you appreciate this video, please thumbs up, put in a comment, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and we will see you next time. Best of wishes to everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.